Okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for making it to Braavo Office Hours. Today, our focus is going to be all about testing and scaling UA strategies for your app. Also, not navigating various marketing challenges and innovations in UA. And we'll also be taking a look at some examples of successful UA creatives. Now, before I introduce our co-host, I'd like to quickly mention a few things about the Livestorm video platform that we're using. So I would just like to ask that you do stay muted. I think by default you are muted, your camera is off, of course, unless you'd like to ask a question. So if you do have any questions in the middle of the discussion, you can use the question feature. It's at the bottom right corner, or you can just pop a question right into the chat, and I'll do my best to address your questions on the fly. And I can also invite you to speak if that is what you would like to do to ask your question. Now, for introductions, we have Shamanth Rao, Shamanth Rao with us today. Shamanth. He's the founder and CEO of the app growth marketing firm RocketShip HQ. And he's also the host of popular mobile user acquisition show podcast. Now, before starting RocketShip HQ, Shamanth led growth at various global mobile brands that resulted in 3 acquisitions, and that's including one by the very popular Zynga. Shamanth has experience across the mobile landscape, ranging from subscription apps to games, and he's managed over $100 million worth of ad spend working with popular subscription apps like BetterMe, Elevate, Lingo Kids, and FitMind. So welcome, Shamanth, to Office Hours. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you, Alana, for having me. Thank you for inviting me to the Office Hours. I'm always happy to share a lot of what I'm learning and seeing working with the numerous engagements that I work on.
We're very excited to hear what you have to say when it comes to testing and scaling UA strategies today. So before we get to the details, I'd love to know a little bit about your own founder story. You know, Braavo's audience is a lot of founders, and I think that they would like to know what your experience was like before you started a growth marketing firm specifically focused on app growth.
Yeah, part of it obviously had to do with a lot of my experience working with apps for close to 8 years. But really what precipitated my starting the company was the fact that I got kicked out of America. And that's not an answer I imagine a lot of people hear often. But I was traveling and I couldn't come back thanks to an overzealous or racist consular officer. And so I was like, okay, now I'm not going to be able to go back to where my home was. I'm stuck on the road. I don't know if I'm going to even have a career. I don't know if I'm going to even get a job again. And I had to figure things out. But thankfully, I had a network that was open and supportive that helped me get started. Right. And I had worked with a number of apps and products over the last 8 years that I had gotten a lot of great results for. And I started advising a number of them after I found I didn't have a home, basically, and I was pretty much going to be stuck outside, and I would have had to have a friend go into my house and vacate it for me. I do not recommend that to anyone unless...
Oh my gosh.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah.
So that's your own version of bootstrapping, I guess, right?
You can call it that. It's life bootstrapping, if you will.
Yeah.
But again, the fact that I'd worked with a number of apps to grow them in the past allowed people to trust me with their own marketing, and that's how I got started with RocketShip.
That's amazing. And so, how has it evolved? You said it was about eight years before you started RocketShip HQ. You had been working with other apps, or is this in the last 8 years? You mean?
Yeah, so I had been working with a number of apps for the 8 years before I started RocketShip. RocketShip started in 2018.
Okay.
Right. Yeah. So, yeah.
And so you've managed some pretty big budgets. You've worked with some pretty exciting apps. I'd love to know what are some of the most exciting campaigns that you've worked on in the last 5-ish years?
Yeah, right. So, I have worked with some fairly big brand name apps. I think the one that most people would have heard of would be Words with Friends. I worked on that for a couple of years, and that was by far very most fun and satisfying
Wow.
projects to work on. Somewhat more recently, we started working with Project Makeover, which is a hilarious. I think just making creators for that is just hilarious and a lot of fun. Uh, but I would just say lately, just in the last couple of years, I think what's been the most satisfying has been just how many of the apps that I've worked with that have actually grown month on month in their revenues and their subscription base after ATT, which I know we're going to talk about. That has been incredibly rewarding to see, especially because we all expected ATT to be doom and gloom. We all expected ATT to destroy things. It has been a challenge, but I think it's been very heartening to know and see that it was possible to mitigate the impact of ATT.
Hmm.
Right. So I've worked with a number of hyperlocal apps. There's multiple health and fitness apps, multiple wellness apps, multiple kids apps. Uh, and I think I had shared earlier, a lot of the work we do is on the subscription app side lately. And our team has been able to unlock significant growth for these even after ATT. And I know, Alanna, we're going to go into the mechanics of a lot of this later on in this conversation.
Yes, definitely. So for some of the people that are part of this audience that may not be mobile marketers or experts in mobile marketing, can you talk a bit about, just before we get into it, what's ATT?
Yeah, ATT is App Tracking Transparency, right? So that is Apple basically introducing what, according to them, is privacy safe measurement and optimization protocols, which has been hugely disruptive because it disrupts the way we track performance, disrupts the way we measure things, disrupts the way we optimize campaigns. I think the quick example I like to give is before ATT, Apple or Facebook would see an anonymized user ID that could say, Alanna made a purchase for a meditation app. Let's show her ads for a yoga app, right? I'm making this up. So before ATT, they would see it. They would never see Alanna's name. They would never see Alanna's characterized, personal characteristics, but they would see a unique identifying number that
Right.
would say Alanna's number is 123, user 123 bought subscription A, and user 123 is, let's show her an ad for a yoga app now. Now, after ATT, that unique user ID that Alanna used to have is no longer easily accessible, which is hugely disruptive because Facebook, TikTok, all of the platforms can no longer find out who's doing what. And that's been the big disruption.
Okay. Yeah, that was something that I think when I had asked, briefed you with some of the questions that I wanted to ask today was, now that you have been in the industry for a while, especially taking a look at subscription apps as well, what has surprised you the most about the app economy in the last few years? And would you say it's does it have to do with the resilience of overcoming ATT for some of these apps?
Very much so. Very much so. I certainly, like I said, I've pretty much grown up with the pre-ATT world, if you will. So I wasn't sure how a lot of apps and developers would cope. And it's definitely been very pleasantly surprising to see how resilient people have been, uh, which is to take nothing away from the fact that ATT has been disruptive, has been extremely difficult to deal with.
Right. Yeah, one of the things that you had mentioned to me was that you're discovering uh, some founders and marketers, when they come to you, that they are maybe less experienced with navigating these challenges than you were expecting them to be. And so, what are some of some of the ways that founders are coming to you with questions about ATT and then also about SKAN, and we can talk about that as well. Yeah, what are some of the biggest challenges that founders and app marketers are coming to you with?
Yeah, I think primarily it's just that ATT means you just need to look at all of your data and performance with a completely new lens. What I mean by that is everybody, myself included, was spoiled by very deterministic, very granular data. We could, say this ad creative and this ad group and this campaign drove 10 purchases. And if you had a BI system, you could say user 123 made this many purchases today, this many purchases 10 days ago, this many purchases 20 days ago. Now all of that's gone. So if somebody, if a founder or a marketer comes to me and says, I want to know how many purchases were driven by creative X, I can't answer that question for them, right? I cannot answer that with 100% precision. I can
I
give you
see.
a rough idea, but I think the biggest shift that people have had to make is understanding that you're not going to get precise, objective answers to a lot of your questions post ATT, and you have to live
Interesting.
with that.
So like the downstream metrics from when a user may have seen a creative all the way through to, that end of funnel event, they've subscribed. With these limitations, we're not able to see exactly which creative may have led to
No,
that purchase. I see. Okay.
exactly.
And
Yeah.
why, how does this change what a marketer slash product team, how they collaborate and what the focus is? Because it sounds to me like with those limitations in mind, it becomes, testing creatives, and we're gonna get into that in this conversation, but testing creatives becomes as important as testing that funnel experience, and the product
Sure.
once they've landed in your app is a lot, if not a lot more important than that creative that drove them there in the first place.
Yeah, definitely, right. And I think people just need to be comfortable with not having perfect, precise, granular answers.
Hmm.
We actually run a lot of models now uh, to make up for the deterministic tracking that we have lost. We run media mix models. But even that, right, people just need to be comfortable saying, I know creative A is better than creative B, but I can't tell you that it's exactly 1.79 times better than creative B. People just need to be comfortable with that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think we do have one quick question that came in from the audience a minute ago. How do you estimate the number of installs that were driven by creatives versus organic? And do you compare prior organic installs to the time frame the UA campaigns were running?
Yeah, right. And that ties in with the models that I briefly talked about. But I think a straightforward way to, so you get some measurement. Facebook will tell you, uh, according to SKAN's protocol, we think you got 20 installs, 20 installs and 5 trials today. That's an incomplete piece of information, but it is there. It's better than having no information. So you're looking at some metrics that are tracked by Facebook, that are tracked by your MMP. But the question asker suggested, we are also comparing your current performance with what might have happened before you started your campaign. So you're comparing with your baseline, organic baseline.
Right.
And if you're at significant levels of spends, you can run media mix models of your own. And we have a couple of YouTube videos around how you can set up media mix models with no programming background. So I'm happy to share that with folks if that's of interest.
Great. Yeah, that would be great. And so there's also the case where, in an ideal UA strategy, you've got your paid UA campaigns bringing in installs, bringing in subscribers, stacked with a solid organic foundation that in many ways that paid strategy helps strengthen that organic strategy
Yeah.
as well in ways that you may not be able to attribute, but you know
Yeah.
that it is improving it. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, you can quantitatively estimate that, right? So you can
Okay.
say, again, that's part of the modeling we do, right? So it's not going to show up directly in your Facebook dashboard or your MMP dashboard. But if you run your models on historical data, you see I increased paid spend by 2x and my organics went up 30%. And so I
Mm,
can say with a reasonable amount of confidence that every paid user brings in an additional zero point 0.3 organic users. It could just be misattribution. It could just
yeah.
be that the user came in through your Facebook campaign and your attribution system is just not picking it up. But whatever it is, you can model it out.
Yeah. Okay. That's very cool. And you said you have some video content related to that, or was that for a different topic?
So I do have a YouTube video that walks people through how they can estimate the organics that happen as a result of paid campaigns. I also do have a video walkthrough for media mix models, which allows them to estimate how many installs or trials or purchases came from each campaign
Cool.
when Facebook's reporting incomplete data, Apple's reporting incomplete data.
Okay. That's awesome. Great. I think I'd love to see that.
Yeah, well, I'll send you links, and you can certainly send it through to people afterwards. Yeah, and
Perfect.
yeah, yeah.
So another thing that I wanted to chat about is we're starting to see apps sort of navigate this space in a workaround with web to web or web to app campaigns where they're actually getting users to subscribe or become registered for their product off of the app itself. I'm seeing a lot of fitness apps are doing it. I just got one advertised to me on Instagram the other day. It was like, do some sort of mindfulness quiz, asking me to sign up. And this is all trying to get me to do a separate action that's not necessarily installing the app. So how are you seeing that work? I know that it hasn't been, it's a UA strategy that is newer. It's been around for a bit, but it's newer than others. How have you seen that working? Is that something that you guys are doing? Is that something that you see success in?
Yeah, so we are doing quite a bit of it. We're seeing quite a bit of success with the web-based flows. But I also try to caution folks that are considering it just from the perspective of cost savings, because of the obvious appeal of this strategy is, oh, we don't have to pay 30% to Apple. So, oh, let's go down this path. It will fix a lot of our profitability issues. It could potentially compensate for product shortcomings. I try to caution people that it isn't as quick a fix as it would appear to be. Uh, the web-based flows are high effort, high reward. Uh, and that's just because it takes a fair amount of iteration to get right,
Mm-hmm.
just because it's also a higher friction path for a user as compared to them going from an ad to the App Store and then installing.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, oh, so my general recommendation is if you're able to see success with app-based campaigns, uh, then they should test web-based flows, because then it's kind of proven that the product is fine, that your funnel is fine, your metrics are fine, and you're testing web-based flows as a new channel, rather than starting out of the gate with web-based flows just because that's a lot of effort to get right. It takes a fair amount of iteration, takes a fair amount of testing, and it still may not work.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so generally, I would recommend treating this as a high effort, high reward strategy.
And what about using it as a remarketing tool for for your users that have already been familiar with your product? Like they installed it, you may have captured their email when they logged in, and then using this as a way to remarket to them maybe a discounted product and yeah, save on
Yeah.
that 30% outside of the App Store.
Yeah, I think that can be a very effective strategy. If you've captured first party data, through emails, certainly you can retarget them.
Mm-hmm.
But also, if you capture their emails, you might as well just send them emails because that's free, right? So I would, if you have the first party data, first recommendation would be to send them emails and treat retargeting as a second tier strategy.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, I just find it interesting seeing so many of those now in,
Yeah,
like I said, I'm getting them advertised to me on Instagram for meditation apps and fitness apps, and I think that it's a very interesting new UA strategy that's worth testing.
sure, certainly,
Hmm.
certainly.
So let's get over to testing then. And I know for a lot of smaller teams, but even I mean even bigger teams with bigger budgets, testing your UA can be a bit of a scary thought because you don't want it to fail. You want an ROI. You don't want to be wasting money. So how would you suggest teams approach truly testing their UA so that their money is well spent?
Yeah, right. So I think definitely I can see why testing UA can be daunting because we hear about and read about the massive UA budgets. It's funny because I think somebody had shared this graph or a chart on Twitter. It basically said uh, the cost structure of a mobile app developer at scale, and it was like 90% UA, 5% team, uh, and that or and 5% other expenses, and that was for a lot of developers at scale. That was probably a little bit exaggerated, but not too much,
Wow.
because for a lot of developers at scale, user acquisition can be the biggest cost.
Hmm.
Uh, so I can see why it can be daunting because you're like, look, if I had to compete against a subscription app that's huge, that's Calm, Headspace, that are known to be spending in the millions, I don't want to lose my money, right?
Right.
So I can understand the concern around that. And my philosophy and recommendation is to really treat UA as a financial function as much as a marketing function. So really make sure it's financially sustainable, right? So how do you do that on on a tactical, actionable level? One is you want in terms of your goals for your first UA test, you want to understand A, is it profitable? B, is it scalable? uh, and again, we I, we may not be able to get into the weeds, and I have some podcast episodes that I can share afterwards about how you model out profitability, how you model out your ROAS. But really, you want to see, if I spend X dollars, am I making the money back, right?
Hmm.
And am I making my money back within 7 days? Am I making the money back within 1 month? Am I making the money back within 6 months, 1 year, 2 years? What is that time period? Because if you're making the money back within two years, are you able to pay the rest of your bills for the 2 years while you're waiting for the money to come back from the subscribers, right? So you want to understand, A, is it profitable? And B, obviously, if it's profitable, is it profitable at some level of scale? Because, uh, you know, if you're profitable and all you're getting is 5 subscribers a day, it's probably not going to pay a lot of bills, right? So those are the two sort of criteria you look at. And in terms of your first test, I typically recommend start with one channel and understand that you're not locked into your full monthly budget. Here's what I mean, right? So oftentimes for an early stage startup, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, but I recommend at least spending 20 to 30,000 a month in their first month, because if you're testing UA, you want to get enough results for it to be conclusive to say, can I scale this to 100 grand, 500 grand and beyond? Or can I not?
Hmm.
You need to do that. And if all you're doing is, if you're spending $500, you're not getting a clear yes or no answer, right? But if you're committing to spending 30,000 a month, I also recommend understanding that you don't have to spend 30 grand, which means if you're spending 1,000 a day, after 5 days, your metrics are all looking terrible. Stop running campaigns, treat it as a
Right.
test, pull the plug,
Yes.
right? It's unfortunate, but it's better than having to spend 30 grand on something that's not working.
Right.
Uh, right. So, yeah, so my broad recommendation is to set apart enough of a budget that lets you give learnings and be prepared to pull the plug early if things are not working.
So a $30,000 budget roughly, but then be ready to shut it down if it's not working. And
Yeah.
so I mean in your first month though, it's very difficult, I would say, to get to wouldn't you say it would be difficult to get to profitability with a UA campaign? Like
Sure.
there's so much testing and iteration that needs to happen.
Sure.
So, how unprofitable could a UA campaign be before you are like, this is just not working. We need to go back to the drawing board.
Yeah, right. So obviously you're not going to see your 1 year revenues, right? So if you acquire a subscriber today, you're going to make revenues from them for 1 year afterwards. You're not going to see all of that revenue in your first month if you're spending 30 grand, right? So you do need to lean on some proxy metrics in month one to understand your profitability, to at least model out your profitability, right? In fact, I had a newsletter edition, I think last week, that basically said, it was titled, "What should your ideal cost per trial be for a subscription app?" And again,
That's
I can
very
send you the
useful.
link. You can send it to folks how I can think about it, right? So, but the broad thesis of that newsletter edition was, and I can also send you the link to signing up for newsletter for folks that are interested. But the broad point I make there is, you can't wait for 1 year to understand profitability, how much you're going to make back in 1 year, but you can make estimates for your cost per trial, and hopefully people come back, people continue to retain for 1 year. But broadly, I would recommend thinking about, okay, from the vast majority of apps, roughly 40 to 50% of trials convert into paying subscribers. Again, if your number is lower than that, then maybe you have a problem with your funnel. You need to fix that, right? But assuming 40 to 45%, then ideally at a blended level, my recommendation is that your cost per trial should be ideally at least $30, $35 or less at a blended level. So if you're hitting that number, and if you know your organic trial to paid conversion is 40, 45%, it has a reasonable chance of being profitable. So I would treat your cost per trial metrics as a good proxy for profitability. And to your question also, Alanna, why, I think your sort of underlying question was, why 30 grand? Is that a magic number, right? It's obviously not a magic number, and if you don't have 30 grand in the bank, you should never spend it. But the reason I recommend 30 grand is, typically, if you look at trials as a early proxy metric, you want to be getting at least 1,000 trials in a month, because you want to test different creators, you want to test, different targeting, maybe even different geos, if you will.
Yeah.
And that means about 30 trials a day. You want to do that because you want to test scalability, right? Obviously, if you don't have 30 grand in the bank, scale that down, spend 10 grand if you will, 5 grand if you will. Know that you're not going to have that much statistical significance. You're going to have fewer learnings, obviously, if you're spending 5 to 10 grand. But in an ideal world, you want to be spending 30 grand because you want to get to 1,000 trials in a month.
Okay.
That is the rule of thumb that I like to use. So the magic number is not 30 grand, the magic number is 1,000 trials in a month. Right. And like I said, if you're getting to,
and it was $30 per trial is
per trial on a, yeah. And this is at a blended level, because as I talked about, you can't say, oh, this particular campaign X is giving me so many trials. You're not going to be able to say that. So at a blended level, $30 per trial, 1,000 trials in a month. Those are good rules of thumb, knowing that, your product may be completely different, but those are good rules of thumb to start with.
Okay.
You can look at, and okay, yeah.
Awesome. That's really, really insightful. We have a couple of questions. Everyone's very interested in this topic, so we have a few questions. The first was from Viva, and they asked, can you share any benchmarks for successful ROIs that you might be seeing per channel? For example, what types of eCPIs are you seeing for iOS apps on Facebook? And what are some benchmark subscription conversion rates and 1-year retention rates that you're seeing for positive ROI? It's a heavy question,
right.
but do you have any benchmarks?
Yeah, right. So again, when you say ROI, I also try to underscore that after Apple's changes, it's just very hard to say my Facebook campaign X has 170% ROI. It's just not that, it's not even possible, right? That said, you can model things out, you can make estimates, and but generally, what we shoot for at a blended level, what we have seen for numerous subscription apps, is 120 to 140% blended ROAS, which is paid plus organic, on a 1 year level, right? Obviously, it's about what you should pick is a function of your cash flow. Like I said, if most of your money comes back 2 years later, it's not going to pay your bill for the next month. So you want to be careful about that. And to your other part of your question, Viva, it's like, what sort of CPIs are you seeing for mobile apps on Facebook? Again, CPI, I'll answer your question, but I will also add it's not very meaningful. I've seen anywhere from $5 to $10 CPIs. What's meaningful is your cost per trial. Like I said, ideally, for some of the better apps, we see even like $20 or slightly less. Some of the other apps we see anywhere in the $30 to $40 range on a blended level. The other metric is SKAN reported CP cost per trial, which is different from your blended cost per trial because SKAN is blocking a bunch of stuff, a bunch of your data. So the main metric you want to look at is your cost per trial. And assuming your cost per trial is in that range, assuming your trial to paid conversion rate is in the 40 to 50% range, you should hopefully be in a good place to have strong ROIs.
All right. Yeah. Okay. And then we do have another question from Albert, and you sort of already touched on this, but I think more broadly, for smaller companies, how do you start paid UA if you don't have enough money to start campaigns in the first place? How can you do this without risking the entire company? I think that is a great question. Yeah. It kind of encapsulates that whole kind of chicken and egg, like where do you start? How do you start? What do you do?
Yeah. So you should never risk the entire company, right? So I think generally, I would say if you don't have a lot of organic traction, you shouldn't even do UA. And assuming you're getting some amount of organics, a good place to start could just be Apple Search to see, are people converting? Apple Search gives you a little bit of a bias sample because people already have intent to convert, and it's also not scalable, but it's a good place to start. So put a couple of $100 on Apple Search to see, are you getting some ROAS numbers? Are you getting some performance? Assuming that's somewhat directionally correct, start on Facebook. And like I said, if I recommend getting to 1,000 trials, but if it's not working, stop after 5 days, right? If you can't spend $1,000 a day, start with $100 a day. Know that you're just getting lesser data, lesser accuracy. So always mitigate risk. Always spend less than you think you need to, at least until you prove things out.
Yeah. And I think also keeping in mind what you said about companies that are very large and doing this at scale, like 90% of their budgets are on UA roughly, and then the rest is on the team. Yeah. So kind of thinking about that in a smaller scale, if you can keep as much money as possible inside the company to reinvest your earnings into UA, that might be one way to approach it early on.
Definitely. Early on, definitely be conservative. Mm-hmm. Once you're starting to scale, I would actually recommend the opposite approach, because oftentimes you see, I have seen a lot of apps that are ready to scale underspend, because you're like, this clear ROAS here. If you spend $1, you're clearly making $1.50 to $2 back. Mm-hmm. They're still underinvesting, they're still underspending. And for apps that have proven unit economics, I would just recommend the opposite, just be more aggressive.
Yeah. Now, so that actually brings me to a question that I had. If you are an app that has maybe really strong performance marketing metrics, so like the 1 to 1.5 or more, but maybe not the best app experience, so maybe retention is not the best. What is something that you would recommend? Like, is it the approach in that case? And also maybe the other way around. If you are a really strong app, you're a really great app experience, you're converting people really well once they land in the app organically, but maybe you're not the strongest at performance marketing. What do you suggest in both those scenarios?
Yeah, I think for both those scenarios, I would ask, how does this fit into your financial models, right? What are your financial goals? Do you want to make X number of dollars this year, no matter what? If the answer is yes, and if your performance marketing is strong, I think you should go ahead and invest, even if your product is not great.
Okay.
Assume you're going to make that money back, right? And similarly, on the flip side, or if you're like, look, the product is great, they're not doing a lot of performance marketing. What are your financial goals, right? And I would tie everything back to financial goals. In fact, pretty much everyone we work with, we build some sort of growth model or a financial model to outline how anything and everything they do ties into financial outcomes.
Okay. So figure out what it is that your goals are and start from there.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I think from this conversation, we've uncovered how to be a bit more confident about navigating ATT, SKAN, testing UA, figuring out whether or not it's time for you to scale UA. And something that I really wanted us to chat about was creatives. So the creatives that we need to think about when it comes to actually launching these UA campaigns. So I know that you brought some examples for us to take a look at today. But before we jump into those, I just would love to know in your own sort of thoughts and experience, what is the best way to start the UA creative process? So like if you're like, okay, I've got a budget for 30 grand, now what?
Yeah, right. Again, in the interest of financial prudence, I recommend starting slow and small. If you're starting with 30 grand or even 10 grand or whatever, start with simple JPEG display ads, right? And an exercise we do, and I recommend everybody do, even if they're a small developer with an internal team, is really take a close look at your App Store reviews to understand what kind of motivations users have for downloading your app, using your app, right? An exercise we do is basically, we look at, okay, there are a couple of sort of headlines under this. See, who are they? What is their demographic profiles? That's number one. What are their pain points? And again, I'm actually looking at something we did for a fitness app, right? So we're like, who are they? These are women 25 to 35. They don't have time to go to the gym. They're busy working professionals. They want something to do at home. That's who they are. Then we look at their pain points. This person does not have time because they're just so busy, and they feel frustrated that they're not taking care of their health.
Right.
The next headline is the benefits, which is like, okay, what transformation does the app help them achieve? The next is, what are the features of the app that helps them achieve the benefits, right? So those are the four headlines that we sort of categorize a lot of user reviews. We do a fairly detailed exercise to do this, but I would recommend everybody do that to understand what to focus on.
And you do this through analyzing your App Store reviews.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. And obviously, if they have a survey or a focus group data, that helps. But if not, they can definitely start with App Store reviews. Understand this. Look at the competitive space. Something I recommend is just don't reinvent the wheel. Or look at the competitive space to see what's working. Look at Facebook ads library, TikTok ads. Don't plagiarize, but get a general idea of the aesthetic, right? Once you see what's working generally broadly, try to reflect the outcomes of your user review analysis in your creative. Start with JPEGs because those are the simplest formats. Those are the simplest and easiest to test. But I would say, if you're spending 30 grand, it's worth investing in video. It's worth investing in UGCs, and I'll talk a little bit more about what that could be like, because certainly for a lot of subscription apps, especially those that are looking to unlock scale, UGC can be very, very effective. Although if you're starting out, start with JPEGs, just again, in the interest of financial prudence.
would also suggest from some of my experience, one way to uncover some of the things that you were describing when it comes to like the user goals, the user's sort of purpose for being there is that you can include some of those questions in your app's onboarding. So if
Yeah.
you yeah, if you have a login or some sort of onboarding experience, you can ask people some questions about themselves, and it helps you get a better understanding of your own user base and what they're there, why they came. And so if you have organic growth, like you can use that in some of your creatives as well.
Yeah, definitely.
Hmm. That's really helpful. I definitely think that taking a look at your user feedback and also seeing what users are saying in their own words is really one of the best ways to start
Yeah.
sort of figuring out the creative process and what is the type of messaging that you should be using.
Yeah. Right. And like I said, just looking at the Facebook ads library can be huge. As well, just seeing what other people are running, right? And again, for people that may be interested, uh, I one big portion of our newsletter has like creative inspiration, so people can sign up for that. So once a week, we just share interesting ads from across the internet. So that's also a good place to start if you're like, I don't want to get lost in the Facebook ads library because that literally has millions of ads, and you don't want to be spending, you know, all your week just looking at ads. Then maybe a somewhat more curated source like the newsletter can be helpful because then I sort of share what the takeaways are, then you can hopefully directly use.
Yeah, I just shared your Mobile Growth Lab newsletter link and your podcast link as well in the chat. I was going to share them later, but now's a good time to drop them in.
Sure. Sure.
So then, okay, I think that we're excited to see some examples of those creatives. I know that you wanted to show UGC and live actor creatives. So are you able to share your screen? Would that be something that we can
Yes.
see?
Yeah. Yeah. Let's do this. I'm going to share a slide deck because which shows visually what these look like, but also shows the briefs, which I think can also be helpful for people looking to produce stuff.
Awesome.
Uh, Here we go. Right? Yeah. So this is a couple of examples of briefs we've actually used. Right? So this is brain training slash mental health app. Right? But basically, I think the big reason this worked is we show a transformation, go
Hmm.
from this to this, and this works across different verticals. For a different wellness app, we said, go from this to this, me being super crazy and scattered to me being very calm, right? So show transformation, show the outcome. I think
Hmm.
that can be extremely powerful in that, right? And here, the other reason this worked was to have a visual cue up top, which shows sort of notepad with a lot of scribbles. That's a big visual cue. Something to keep in mind is if you're producing UGC or videos, the the first 3 seconds are very critical.
Yeah.
So you want to be leading with something that is a hook that is compelling enough for users to continue watching, right? So that's one example. The other one, here's a second example, right? So again, this starts with a challenge. Something like this can be very powerful because, again, you're challenging a user, you're drawing them in through your first 3 seconds. And
Hmm.
of course, you're showing them the app, you're showing them the app experience. This, again, this also ties into borrowing and getting inspired from the ads library because this is, we show a fail state, which is very common for gaming ads. If you've seen a lot of gaming ads, they're like, oh, here's a challenge, do this, do this, do this, and then it says fail. And and I'm sure there's you know uh, consumer psychology that explains why. What matters is you don't need to know and understand consumer psychology. You need to be able to just borrow that, what has worked in games for your subscription apps.
Right.
Uh, right. And in this case, we did this for the brain training app as well.
Okay.
Uh, yeah, yeah, right. That's another example. This is for a steak thermometer. Again, we emphasize achievement. So we say, hey, we should emphasize transformation and achievement. Say, you had steak that used to get burnt, and now you make immaculately cooked steak. So it's show the transformation, show how the product allows you to do it.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, that it can work really well. And this is also something we see. I did it to work well for a lot of learning apps and learning products.
Okay.
Very specifically, we've worked with a number of kids apps lately, and with every single one of them, showing a kid start by showing a kid achieving something, having the moment of celebration and achievement can be huge. Uh, and again, the goal is to think through a lot of this, see what's working out there. Like I said, our newsletter is a good place to start if you're looking for, somewhat curated inspiration as well.
Yeah.
This is, yeah, right. And this is, again, sort of the win moment, I did it moment, show the kid winning, and, and then show a demo of the app itself. Uh, uh, and show actual gameplay, show actual usage of the app leading to a CTA. Right? With all of this, what I think you'll also notice is even if you're running on TikTok, what you shouldn't do is just a dancing video on TikTok.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that sounds kind of somewhat obvious, and trust me, we've tested that, right? So we're like, okay, TikTok's cool, so let's just do super crazy dancing videos. It just doesn't work if it doesn't tie into the product, which again
Right.
sounds somewhat obvious, but we've gone down that path where we had a dancing video that actually references the product, but we don't show the product, we don't show the walkthrough, we don't show the transformation. As you know, I think the old cliche goes, show, don't tell. So
Yeah.
just showing and demonstrating can be very, very powerful.
Mm-hmm.
And especially if you're scaling, especially if you're on TikTok, I think these can be extremely powerful.
Definitely. Yeah, so we've got a few different categories here. Let's just run through them quickly again. You've got before and after. Then there
Yeah,
was competition or see if you can do what I can do, right?
yeah,
And
yeah,
then watch me be great at this thing. Right?
yeah.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, those are great ways to think about the different types of creatives that you can approach. And
Yeah.
so what would you say is the way that is one of the best ways for people to actually get user generated content produced? Like how do you go about having an influencer or a creator provide you with good quality content?
Yeah, right. And again, there are different approaches. You certainly have the DIY approach where you can recruit creators yourself. You can DM people on TikTok, DM creators on TikTok or Instagram. Something I recommend is generally not working with influencers because influencers can get expensive. If you go to an Instagrammer or a TikToker with a couple million viewers, it's going to cost you a lot of money. It's not clear how well it'll work. Right? But obviously, if you have those budgets, please go for it. Uh, uh, so there is the DIY approach. You DM people, you coach them, you send them the scripts of the sort that I shared on the screen, and you have them shoot. Then you do the post production yourself on your team internally. You can do that. You can work with partners like our team. One of the things we do that is, I think, very helpful for a lot of developers we work with is we don't work with influencers. We work with actors or creators, and these are people that again, if you did the DIY approach, you could recruit yourself. And these are the people we work with are typically part-time actors in New York and Los Angeles. So if you're in, you could go to one of the local sites and put out a casting call and recruit folks out there.
Okay.
Uh, yeah, yeah,
That's smart.
right. Yeah. And the advantage of that is also that, again, if you go to an influencer, oftentimes you'll get the thing that I have my audience, I need to care for my audience. Don't tell me what to do.
Right.
I will do what I will. And then you have no control over what comes back. Sometimes it just has nothing to do with your product, which is so frustrating.
Yeah.
If you're recruiting actors or creators, you have full editorial control. You're basically
Right.
that director.
Hmm.
And again, the way we work is we we direct the shoots remotely, which is and asynchronously. We give them very clear directions. We tell them shoot and come back, send it to us. If it's ready, we'll use it. If it needs reshoot, we'll give you feedback, which again is a lot easier and more cost effective than a Hollywood like setup where you're renting a warehouse, renting a film crew, and shooting stuff. It's
Yeah.
definitely not as hard, right? And again, for people who are interested in a lot of this process, we had a couple of episodes of our podcast. There's a three parts. I think it was called uh, "All Learnings from 1,000+ UGC Ads." Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Cool.
So people can look at that, and we break down the entirety of our process for anyone that's interested.
That's that would be great. That would be, you said a three-part podcast. That would probably be very insightful.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's such an interesting take on getting UGC, that you think that it's user-generated content and that it's influencers, or it could be even your own users talking about your product. But I think that sort of having editorial control by working with professionals is a really, that's a really good insight, and that's a good take on approaching creatives that feel like UGC. It feels genuine, but at the same time, you're getting more what you want, and working with professionals who probably are easier to work with.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Okay. So I think that I just had one last question. Um, and this is because I know that we do have some hyper-local app businesses that are in our audience, and just generally in our community. And I think broadly speaking, when it comes to UA strategies, they tend to work really well for apps that maybe aren't hyper local. And so I'm curious, based on what we've talked about today, is there anything that local, like hyper local apps need to think about that's different, maybe a little bit different than what we've talked about?
Yeah, right. So it's a very real challenge and issue to work with hyperlocal apps for UA, primarily because algorithms do not like hyperlocal apps. By what I mean by that is you see way higher CPMs, way worse conversion rates, not because your ads are bad, but because literally every time I run a Facebook ad campaign that is not targeted to a national audience, I see the algorithm does not favor the local campaign. So it is a real problem. There's a couple of things you can do to mitigate impact. And I have worked, and again, I've seen this across different verticals. There's a delivery app we worked with that was in select cities. There's a job search app. There's a local laundry app we worked with. Pretty much every single one of them had the exact same problems. So the things I recommend doing, A, whenever possible, combine targeting for different cities. So you give the algorithm as large an audience as possible. So ideally, at least 2 to 5 million of an audience. Uh, so the algorithm, its impact is at least somewhat mitigated. That's number one. Number two, the other thing you could do is even if you're present in, let's just say, 5 to 10 cities, then you still run a nationally targeted campaign. But if somebody comes from, but as soon as they come in, say, enter your zip code, and if they're not in this area you're servicing, then you say, oh no, we're not in your area yet, but enter your email ID and we'll tell you when we are
Mm,
there. That oftentimes helps. Uh, and oftentimes it just helps just not to do Facebook, because Facebook is the worst offender in terms of penalizing local businesses. Maybe
wow.
one option would be just to start with Google UAC, which has
Okay.
different challenges, but for local businesses, it just makes more sense to do Google UAC, makes more sense to do TikTok. We used to see Snap work much better. Snap's just performance has deteriorated, but it could be worth revisiting. Uh, but really, you are fighting with one hand tied behind your back with local businesses. But there's things you can do to mitigate that impact.
I think that that idea about sort of like a wait list or a registration list is a really smart way of
Yeah,
capturing at least spending that money in a way that you could capture a future customer. Yeah,
yeah,
that's
yeah,
great.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
a great suggestion. Okay, well, we're coming up to the last couple of minutes. I am opening up the floor. Does anyone have questions for Shamanth? I know that you guys already did a great job asking questions during the session. Any questions people have that we haven't covered? I can also spotlight you if you want to ask a question directly on camera. I don't think so. All right.
Mhm.
We also had a few questions on the registration form that I think that for the most part we have covered. I think one that I thought was a little bit broad, and I know this is going back to our question about, or just the topic of creatives. But one question we had was, how do you find out creatives that convert into purchases? And I think like what we discovered from this conversation is that because of ATT, it's difficult to actually attribute creatives through to a purchase. Is there anything else you
Yeah,
wanted to add to that?
yeah. You can say you can directionally get a sense of what creative is better, what creative is winning, but you're not going to be deterministic and granular about it.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, if there are no other questions, Shamanth, is there anything else you wanted to add?
Not really. I think thank you for a detailed and in-depth conversation. It's, not a lot of folks I speak with really get a lot of nuance. So thank you for asking such great questions, Alana. And yeah, again, if folks are interested, definitely sign up for the newsletter. Like I said, there's creative inspiration. There's a lot around subscription apps that I've already shared, and I'm happy to share links to if you want to send out to people afterward. Uh, right? And yeah, and there's a lot around post ATT measurement that I talk about, just because that is a huge mess, unfortunately, for whatever reason. So feel free to sign up for the newsletter. I think Alana has dropped the link in the chat, but it's rocketship.hq.com/newsletter, and check
Yes.
out,
Yeah.
and yeah,
So
yeah,
check out that newsletter. It's in the chat there. There's also the Mobile User Acquisition Show podcast, which Shamanth is the host of. Also dropped it in the chat, and you will all get this recording sent to your email like shortly after once this session ends and it gets uploaded. So yeah, I just thank you. This was a really interesting chat for me too. It's so much fun to be able to talk with people with such a high level of expertise on such specific topics. So thank you, Shamanth. And thank you
mhm.
everyone who joined today and those who didn't actually come in live. I hope that you enjoy the recording afterwards. As always, I'd love to hear any feedback you guys have on this session. So feel free to shoot me a message directly. I'm Alana at getbravo.com. And yeah, I think that's it. So we do this once a month. It is February, so I will see you guys again in March. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.